Hi, and welcome to Magic Numbers. This is episode number 110, and I'll be talking about drafting in MKM, and I'm going to do a slightly deeper dive on what is ALSA and what secrets does this number hold. Because we talk about ALSA quite a lot in my streams, other content creators use the term, but I don't think that there has ever been a proper dedicated piece of content that explains ALSA in more detail. And we're going to look at some numbers behind it, at some distributions with it, and maybe knowing those distributions will give you a bit more information on how to use the number. Before we move into this, I would like to thank MTGA Zone for being the sponsor. I write articles for them, and they also help me with the stream. And I would like to thank my patrons. And there is a new patron, Dylan. So thank you very much for joining. And I don't know if I thanked them last time. So mathematical statistician might or might not be a new patron, depending if I mentioned them in the last week. And don't worry, we're going to move to mathematical statistician's question earlier. Before we move to the main topic, I always have a small preamble when I talk about a random topic, which is usually not so random, either related to the stream or related to recent events. And this one is evaluating Pro Tour drafts from the arena perspective is tricky and laden with traps. Basically, every content creator and every limited aficionado is trying to catch at least some of the draft portion on the Pro Tour. And very often we see mind-boggling picks. And it would be easy to say that people who do them don't know what they're doing, but it's also very difficult to think that players like Jean-Emmanuel Deprat don't know what they're doing at a draft table. As we know, he is a passionate drafter and drafts a lot, every format, and particularly in Cube. There is a big difference in drafting in a pod on the Pro Tour at high stakes, where you know that every single person knows the pick order, consumed a ton of content before the Pro Tour because they want to do as well as they can. You have to pick certain strategies that might, with players where probably, like 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 drafters know little about how draft is operating on your pod, because good cards will dry out very quickly. You can build counter strategies to that. You have bigger plans. Those plans don't always work out. Those plans will sometimes be dependent on opening a couple of bombs. And I think that especially in the case of Jean-Emmanuel's draft, his plan was to be flexible with colors, go into green, kind of blue, soupy deck. But those decks frequently rely on getting a couple of really good bombs that somehow can be cast by your deck. Jean-Emmanuel got one good bomb, Incinerator of the Guilty, but I think he was pretty unlucky in opening other good things that would be fitting in his deck, and that's what made it pretty weak. And he picked several cards that you may think that were not amazing, but actually in the context of the pod draft, they might be quite good selections. From empty packs, he picked things like a card that destroys all the artifacts and enchantments, which is a great sideboard card against a blue-red deck and will win you games basically on the spot, and that's what you're aiming at the Pro Tour. We're not going to talk about his choice of using Incinerator of the Guilty as a blocker. I think that he mentioned it a few times that this was a punt. I think this was the kind of a punt that comes from playing open deck list. When you saw other players' deck list and you think what is there and you don't remember what is there, you sometimes will make a mistake. While if you were playing without knowing what the opponent is doing, you would probably think, what can they have from the full collection of the cards in the set? And then he probably would have come to the conclusion that they might have the exact card, Torch the Witness, that was used against him. So we're not going to talk about it. But pod drafting is tricky. Pod drafting at a high level is extremely tricky. Keep in mind, you're also making those picks without seeing the cards at all times, which is something that we're so used to it on Arena that we don't even consider how much more difficult it is to draft when you actually don't see the cards at every single step of the picks you're making. So I would just warn you to make sweeping statements about PT drafts, because it's a completely different animal. And I drafted high level drafts last time, probably in 2003, so I probably forgot how it even looks like. Thanks for the raid to whoever raided. I assume it was El Gran Boa, which is great, but unfortunately I cannot see the information about the raids, but thank you. Oh, was it Jamie? Oh, okay. Thank you, Jamie, for the raid. But I do remember how straining it was to remember every single pick and how many 2-drops I have and how many 3-drops I have during those drafts. And it is far from easy. I mean, obviously, we're talking about players who have vast experience with that, but still, it's an extra taxation on your brain in a situation also of extreme stress, because you know that this draft will be pretty important. I mean, you cannot just go 0-2 in the first draft and then make a top 8. Oh, wait, no, you can actually. But it is not something that happens very frequently. Question of the week. And this time it's from a new patron, mathematical statistician. And it is not exactly about magic, but I'll spin it back to magic and talk to you a bit about my process of addressing things. Question was, when testing a new hypothesis, would you start with a simple model and then incrementally add complexity, or attempt to come up with a full complex model with likely errors and falsehood, and then by removing incorrectness incrementally arrive at a coherent mathematical model? And I'm pretty sure that there will be people who do one or the other. I definitely pick option number one. I like to start with a simple model and I like to incrementally add complexity. And there is a reason why I do that. Every level of complexity can find different mistakes in the model that I'm trying to analyze. And if I start with a complex model, I skipped several steps where I had the simple model that could detect certain errors in it. And because I skip those, I might be just examining something that doesn't make sense from the beginning. So I'd rather start with a simple model and then I incrementally add complexity. And if you will go through back catalog of magic numbers, you will see how certain types of analyses that I do for sets that have right now became staples that I do every time that the set is released have been born. And I started from very simple, looking at a certain problem, like, I don't know, which cards are good in the early metagame. And over time, I honed those methods. I changed them. I saw what was superfluous, and I expanded on things that I found important. And due to that, I arrived at the level where I'm happy with basically rerunning similar analyses every month. And I did the same thing with the archetypist tool. That, by the way, I think new data is released on 17 Lens, so you can actually check archetypist on 17 Lens for the murders at Karlov Manor. All the other tools basically, and I also do it at work when I do actual science. Starting with the simple thing and then adding complexity as I get more data and I know exactly how to add the complexity in a smart way rather than going all in and trimming things that I think are incorrect, because sometimes it's very difficult to find what is incorrect already at that stage when you have a high complexity. So hopefully that answers you the question on general approach to analysis, at least my philosophy of it. Okay, we can move to the main topic. And I will start with the part about understanding ALSA. We use the term ALSA a lot. I very often don't even describe what the acronym means, but I guess today we have to. ALSA, average last seen at. And it's a metric widely used that shows how late cards go in the draft. The lower the ALSA, the earlier the card gets. My feeling is that we talk about ALSA, but it's not fully understood by most of the people who listen about it. And I think that this is a gap in knowledge that is very easy to bridge in, well, half an hour, couple of slides that I'm going to do. So this is a general problem that I find with the single number metrics that describe a distribution, that they can be misleading, because when people hear a single number, they think of a single thing. ALSA is a single number that describes a distribution of how cards are getting picked. It's a sort of weighted average of a large distribution. And I think that talking about distributions completely in vacuum is pretty pointless. So let's start with visualizing ALSA and how does it look like. So how does it look depending on which card we're talking about? And I took out the data from the public data sets of 17 lands from the draft. I calculate my own ALSAs based on that. That's the kind of a person I am. I don't use the ALSA from the website. I calculate my own because it will be easier to show this distribution. You cannot get them from the website. So let's look at the visualization of the ALSA of a very low ALSA bomb, like Aurelia's Vindicator. That has ALSA of 1.14, which means it almost never gets passed. Most of the time, it's picked when you seed it, and you never get it passed. So if we see the data, this is numbers, not fractions or anything. In the data set I had that had roughly 11,500 drafts in it, 17 lens user opened Aurelia 323 times, but they were past Aurelia only 37 times. So basically 90% of the time when person next to the 17 lens user opened Aurelia, they picked it. 8 times someone managed to get, this is any pack, Dreykas, this is pack 1, 2, and 3. I agglomerated all those data to have a bigger sample size. But we will get to the pack 1, pack 2, and pack 3 ALSA later in the seminar. So as you can see, like 8 times people got past Aurelia as a pick 3. Must be nice when you get that. I assume that these happened in pack 3, and just happened that 2 people on the side of the person couldn't put any white card in their deck. Still, I mean, I don't see any reason why not to pick it and why not to play it in any deck that I have and just manage to jam a couple of planes in, because the card is pretty ridiculous. But as you can see, a card that has ALSA of close to 1, you will only see it when you open it. Very rarely you will see it passed to you in like packs 2 and 3. So let's move a bit further. We got a bomb that has a slightly lower ALSA of 2. Hide in Plain Sight is an example of a card. Still a good card, quite amazing. But you will see how different the distribution of those picked looks like for Hide in Plain Sight. First of all, you have 600 times that people opened it, because this is a rare. Aurelia's Vindicator is a mythic. That's the main difference here in terms of the numbers. And then around half of the time, people get it passed. Slightly less than a half, maybe like 45% of the time they get it passed, because here you have 627. You assume that the number here of opened was pretty similar, because the Kato Kakato, I got a comment on YouTube that if I could add some kind of visual overlay of cards, and that's what I came up with. And it's going to be showing also when I discuss about graphs. So hopefully let me know if you find it as an improvement, but at least I don't have to read the card. Anyone can do it in their own time. But half of them disappear, so you get it passed around 50% of the time that is opened. Then around a quarter of the time, you get it even in pick 3. So basically that means that of the 630-ish that were open, still 130 get to pick 3. Around 100 gets to pick 4, around 50 get to pick 5, around 19, so pretty rare, but still happens, will get to pick 6. And, twice it happened that someone opened it, didn't pick it, and it still wheeled. So they had a second chance of picking it, and even managed to go to pick 10 twice. So that's a big difference in the distribution between something that has ALSA close to 1 and ALSA that is 2. Now let's look at the card with the ALSA of 3, and it's, oh my god, it's Lightning Helix. It's an uncommon, so higher counts than in case of rares. But people opened 1,277. By the way, this doesn't mean that they opened 1,277, because you can see 60 times it wheeled, actually. So sometimes people didn't pick it, and out of those sometimes that they didn't pick it, they managed to wheel. And those wheeled cards will not be counted here, because it's average last seen as, with the emphasis on last. If it was seen as pick 9, it will not be counted as seen as pick 1, because you only count the last instance of it being seen. So you basically deduct those 60 from the general data set where it was open. Yep. I hope that it will become clearer when we go to the lower ALSA, higher ALSA cards. But at ALSA 3, you even sometimes get Lightning Helix as last pick. I'm not saying it's correct, but it did happen twice in my data sets of 11,000 drafts, so it can happen. We're talking about pick 1 of any pack, so it can be in pack 3. But you can see that only roughly 20% of the Lightning Helices is picked by the person that opens them next to you. You still get around 80% of them passed to you. And then more than a half, more than 60% probably even gets as far as pick 3 when it was open 2 seats from you. Slightly under half, 40% or so gets to pick 4, and then smaller fractions get to pick 5, 6, 7, 8. You still get around 10% of lightning helices at pick 7, but 90% of them are gone by then because 6 players had a chance of picking them, and 90% of the time one of those 6 players decides to go for the lightning helix. And 60 times it wheeled, so probably roughly 4 or 5% of the time lightning helix will wheel, and probably most of those will be in pack 3. We will look at why in a second. Okay, now let's look at the mid-quality common, and you will see something changing in this curve. Normally, all of those things started that the one is the highest, and then it just drops down and then flattens out at the end. But when we look at the ALSA number of 5 or so, you see something different. You see fewer of the there's a lower frequency of the card at pick 1. By the way, for commons, the magic number is around 3,200. So you open 3,200 of each common in my data set on average. This means that you don't see 1,000 and a bit of the instances of auspicious arrival as your first card. Why? Well, because you see them here, because 1,000 of them wheeled. So if you add this to this, you will end up with the total number of them that you opened. Because again, it's average last seen as. So if you saw it in pick 1, but then you saw it in pick 9, ALSA only counts that you saw it in pick 9. It doesn't matter that you saw it in pick 1. Yeah, that's the magic of this metric. So because this is a card that wheels quite frequently, around 33% of the time, you won't see that frequently as pick 1. It won't count it, at least. The peak is at pick 3, because from here it doesn't wheel that often. So from pick 3 you would have to go to pick 11. It wheels only 500 times. At pick 4 the number is lower. And why is it lower? It wheels less, so it should be higher. But no, because this is the signal of other people picking it. This means that probably at this stage it's still not picked until pick like 11, or very rarely. So only at pick 12 you will see the signal of people starting to pick the card. Yeah, and then at pick 5, you basically, that's the last chance that you can wheel, and it almost never wheels at that stage. So that's already taken by other people. And here you just don't see it anymore because there is no wheel from pick 6, because we have only 13 cards in the pack in this set. Is there one graph that's missing? There's potentially one graph that was missing. And why is it missing? It was such a good one. It was comparing 2 different cards. Oh, well, I guess we have to live with that. Last one is card number 6. It's a wheel fodder. So card with an ALSA of 7 that should wheel quite a lot of time. It's macabre reconstruction. And here we see a completely different shape of the graph. You only see it 800 times when you open it, out of 3,200 roughly, because it wheels so often. Like 2/3 of the time it will wheel from that particular pick. And then it slowly climbs because it wheels less to that stage. So you will see it as pick 2 more frequently because people start picking it. And the absolute peak is at pick 6. Why? Because there is no more wheel. So if you saw it at pick 6, which you will almost always see, because only maybe 10% of the macabre reconstructions are picked by pick 6, then you won't see it ever again. So you don't have a chance of seeing it again because there is no pick 14 in this set. So there is a big jump and it peaks there and then it starts dropping off. So yeah, these are the different distribution based on the different ALSA, and thinking about it can make you understand slightly more how this metric works and what it actually means in terms of how often the card was picked by the particular pick. This is not the end of what I talk about ALSA. The distribution, knowing the distribution is nice, and it broadens your understanding of 17 lens metrics that are commonly used, which is good. But I think that it would be completely pointless to talk about ALSA without some more actionable advice, or maybe not actionable, but advice that will make you understand analyzing this number slightly better, because it's not as straightforward. We see ALSA numbers and we see, oh, here is ALSA 1, here is ALSA 2. So probably there are sort of like on the line in terms of how many cards you will see based on the ALSA. But it's not a linear thing. And this is quite important. So let's look at the impact of ALSA on how many copies of the card will you on average see per draft. And this is the graph for the commons. Ignore those. These are the special guests, whatever, list cards. And they are very rare, but they are still common in the data sets. So you will see very few of them per pod. So here is number of copies that you will see per pod on average. And here is the ALSA value. And this curve is not linear. So if it was linear, it would go something like this. But it doesn't. It goes slightly crooked. So if you would have a common with ALSA 2, which sometimes they happen, you will get roughly 0.7 of this common. You will see roughly 0.7 of this common per pod. If you have ALSA of 4, you will see around 1.5. So almost twice the difference between ALSA 2 and ALSA 4. But the difference between ALSA 4 and ALSA 6 is only half. So you will see 1.5 copies of the ALSA 4 cards, and you will see 2 copies of ALSA 6 cards. So the difference between those flattens. And then if you go to 8, you will see only 2.25. The left one, the most left one, is actually makeshift binding. But novice is the other dot next to it. So yeah, you're right. So only 0.25 cards extra you will see by going from ALSA 6 to ALSA 8. And I think that this is important because sometimes people look at it as a sort of linear thing, and it's not. Like if something has a very low ALSA, as a common especially, you will see much less of it. You will almost never see them. If it has difference between ALSA 4 and 5 is actually quite smaller. You will see still quite a lot of copies of this card. So there's a big difference of seeing 0.8 copies of Novice Inspector per draft and I don't know, 1.5 copies of Dog Walker, because you see twice as often one card than the other. But difference between the 4 ALSA card, like, I don't know, Witness, the Gargoyle Witness, and ALSA 6 card, like something that has ALSA 6, that will be only like half of difference, but you will still see 1.5 copy of one and 2 copies of the other, which means that those cards are reliably draftable. But when you see only 0.8 copy per draft, this is not a reliably draftable card, which makes it a much stronger signal if you see that. Okay. And you have a slightly less impressive curvature on the uncommon curve. Nonetheless, that it's still there. So you will see, like at ALSA 2, you will see 0.25 maybe copies of a given uncommon per pod. So 1 every 4 drafts on average. At ALSA 4, you will see almost 0.6, 0.55 of each uncommon. So once every 2 drafts, which is much more frequently. And at ALSA 6, you will see around 0.8. So you should see 1 every draft roughly on average. Common curve is particularly important to understand why the points hanging out at 0.1, these are the list cards. They are just very rare. So you see very few of them per draft, but they do still have ALSA, and they do still have a rarity at common and uncommon. So I didn't feel like filtering them out from the data. So yeah, as you can see, these are almost linear. And actually, I'm not going to show you the curves for rares and mythics, because rare and mythic curves are actually linear. What list uncommon has ALSA of 2? I actually do not know. If I would be guessing, maybe the 5/5 Worm with Convoke. I can actually, I'll check. I think that it's either Mentor of the Meek or Tragic Slip. Oh, Mentor is in the comment. Okay, good. I couldn't see the chat well. No, the Simic artifact that makes everything flying is less picked. I think that hopefully you get some better idea on how ALSA works from this. I mean, that was the whole point. I think that the key part is that you cannot look at it as a linear scale, and there is a big difference between ALSA 2 and 3 and 4, and the smaller difference between ALSA 4, 5, and 6. That's the thing that you should take away from that, if anything. And also think more about that. This is the distribution of when the card is going and when it's picked, rather than just one number. If you get those two things out of it, I'm super happy. And if you want to go deeper, probably worth rewatching. I think I'm going to write about ALSA and put it on the MTGA zone as well in the form of the article. So yeah, if you're still interested to get something more out of it, follow my Twitter and you shall get the notification about my newest creation. Okay, now a bit more to the actual set. And what I always do, because this is something that is not something that 17 Lens does on their own. I calculate ALSA not only for the whole dataset, but I also calculate ALSA for individual packs, because my hypothesis some time ago was that there actually will be some cards that have a different ALSA depending on the pack. And every set I do it, and every set I have the same result, which is beautiful because it shows that there are some things in the universe that are unchangeable, and you can predict them with quite a good conviction. And one thing is that the multicolor cards will go much later in pack 3. So I calculate the ALSA for pack 1, I calculate the ALSA for pack 3, I look at the difference between them, and this is the number that I came up. So basically this means that Maverick Thopterist, the 5 mana 2/2 that makes 2 flying Thopters and has improvise, Maverick Thopterist goes 1.5 picks later. And looking at this card, which has in pack 1 ALSA of around 3, and in pack 3 has an ALSA of around 4.5. So you will see that this is per pod, per draft. So this card unfortunately is here, so it will be hard to see any kind of detectable difference in it, but you're much more likely to see it. But Private Eye is an actual factual card from the set, and it will have some ALSA. We can quickly take a look at what it will be. It's 3.5 on average, which means that it will probably have roughly like 2.9 in pack 1 and around 4.3 in pack 3. So we have 2.9 somewhere here. So you will see roughly 0.1 copies of it in pack 1, and you will see roughly 0.2 copies of it in pack 3 per pod, which is a double increase. So you have twice the chance. So if you are already in the Azorius archetype, you can get the reward later in the draft. And key thing to think about there, that if you identify that Azorius is open, the chance of that happening is obviously increasing by quite a lot. So let's move to Private Eye. Talk about Private Eye. And there are several cards that have the same trend. All of them are multicolored. So all the cards that are reward for late are multicolored. And I think that this is something to keep in mind. If you see that certain color combination is open, it's a gamble and sort of a bet, but at least it's a reasonable bet because you know that those things are going later. And I especially think that Gleaming Gear Drake is a good reward if you find an Izzet lane, because I think Izzet deck is pretty strong. It's just that you need to be slightly fortunate with those uncommons. So if you manage to get a couple of those things early in the first pack, you can sort of hope to get at least some rewards in pack 3 because they will go later. Because we see Gleaming Gear Drake, you see Detective Satchel also going a whole pick later than in the first pack. And there is also the Ill-Timed Explosion that I didn't put as a visualization because it's a rare. Kylox Visionary Inventor, which is not good, but I think that the vehicle also goes later, which is actually very good. So a bunch of those Izzet cards that are really important for the deck will go later in pack 3. So if you find a slightly open Izzet lane, maybe there is a reward waiting for you at the end. Other cards that I found important because of the lower rarity, Sumala Sentry is going a whole pick later in pack 3. So if you're in Selesnya aggro, you might get a surprising late pick Sumala Sentry in pack 3. This, by the way, all this data is from best of one, so keep that in mind. I didn't do those analyses for best of three, which is a shame because I play best of three right now, and I should do more of the analysis that will help me personally. But okay. I could also look at the cards that go later in pack three, and I did, but I just thought that the graph was not interesting enough to show you, because the conclusion from it is in pack three, when you already have your deck and you see this whatever it's called, what's the mole god called? Agras Rampage, Alka-Seltzer's Rampage. If you see it somewhere and you don't see anything that you would put in your deck, and you think, okay, I already have the playables, I'm not going to pick something I'm not going to play, I'm grabbing 20 gems. That's what people do. Most of the cards that go earlier in pack 3 are rares. And there is one other category of cards that go earlier in pack 3, but not as much as the rares. And these are the fixing cards. And especially the fixing lands, Escape Tunnel and the Public Thoroughway. Both of them go much earlier in pack 3, which is something that you should keep in mind during your draft. Make sure that you get your fixing as early as you can, because the later you wait for it, the lower the chance of you getting it, because everyone else is trying to do the same in the last pack. So it will be much more contested. All those fixing cards, all those, especially land fixing cards, are going much earlier in pack 3. I also looked at a stat that is somewhat interesting, because we very often think, what's the best first pick? I looked at the cards and the win rates of the decks they were in if they were first picked. And the number one is Aurelius Vindicator. Shocking to no one. Card with the highest win rate in the format is also the best first pick. Decks that contained Aurelius Vindicator had around 59.5% win rate when it was a pack one, pick one. Then a bit further behind, 58.9, we have Izoni, Center of the Web at 58.9. Really strong card, and I am still waiting for my first win against it when opponent plays it. And also, I'm still waiting for the first time I'm actually getting it. It would be nice to play with it once and feel like those people who thrashed me mercilessly by playing it. But number 3, best pick of the format is Novice Inspector, which is basically almost equal with the Izoni Center of the Web. The difference is fractions of a fraction of a percentage. So Pink Pens, I beat Vindicator many times. I never beat Izoni. And that must be something about my deck building style. So Novice Inspector is proving to be an incredible card. I mean, honestly, I gave it, I think, a B or a B plus in my set review, and I am not sure if I'm not going to lose points in my end of the format Cortical's battle of who was the better in set predicting. So yeah, third of all the cards in the set, all the rarities, is Novice Inspector. Then we have a couple of busted rares like Ezreal Agency Chief. It's a good first pick because from then on you can just draft Azorius on rails. So cool. Kaya, Spirit's Justice. I played with it once and it's solid. I didn't think it would be that good, but maybe it puts you in an interesting lane and you know what to do, and hopefully you draft a better deck just because you first picked it. 58.4. And then we have a bunch of cards that are Anzrak. That's what the name of the Molgo. Okay. Then we have Dog Walker, a good first pick. I tried to take the data from as late in the format as I possibly could. So hopefully it doesn't have too much of the early drafts. But still, Dog Walker seems like a good first pick, despite being just a common. And this is something that is interesting about this format. It seems to be a bit more common-centric than the previous set, even when I think that all the cards that I had in the best first picks were rare or mythic, or at least most of them. And then we have a card that I think is still slightly undervalued. I hope not by people who are watching my stream, but if you are, then it's a great time to correct it. Reckless Detective. And the card is just amazing. It's a good first pick because it keeps you open for either going Boros or for maybe drafting some sort of ultra aggressive version of Rakdos, which I think is a valid deck, or maybe for drafting some kind of is a deck because it works excellent with any artifacts that you can sacrifice and draw a card from that. So Reckless Detective is a great card. The 2 mana, the body will be usually 2/3 on attacks. It's not a very good defensive creature, but who cares? It's a thing that if you don't kill for the first 2 attacks, it accrues already so much value in card filtering and maybe even card draw if you have some spare artifacts that you can sacrifice, or at least mana because you sacrifice those clues for free and you draw a card anyway. Happens to the best of us, Zach, but I didn't and undervalue it, I think. Anyway, other cards that are interesting. I mean, everyone knows that Lightning Helix is decent, and especially when it is in the best color combination. So let's not dwell on it. But I think Flourishing Bloomkin, great first pick because this card will be the stronger, the more forests you play, the more likely you are to double spell with it on turn 5 and still get a 4/4 for 2 mana. The better you feel about it. And yeah, I mean, I had a bunch of decks with Archdruid's Charms, and Flourishing Bloomkin is fantastic in those decks, even when you have playing like 3 colors. That's fine because you can usually flip the Bloomkin and get the mana for your Archdruid's Charm somehow. What other cards do we have? Peggy. Why do I call unicorns and Pegasus the same always? Unicorn, putting Nay in Neighborhood. Neighborhood Guardian is one of the better first picks. This card, I think we learned very quickly, is absolutely busted, and there is nothing wrong with first picking it. Again, we see this hide in plain sight, which I think is still an undervalued card because people know that Cryptic Code is good, but hide in plain sight is equally good as a first pick. Life and Guard, solving Hothouse on turn 5. You're talking my language. And I think that the Hothouse case is also one of the undervalued cards. That's the 4 mana one. When you have 7 lands, you can solve it, and then you can play things from top of your library if there are land creatures or enchantments. And probably when you play it, most of your cards should be that. Yeah, 7 mana, blink. 9 mana, blink, 11 mana, blink, opponent dead. That's the kind of the card that Hothouse is. I also picked some of the low win rate first picks. And I only picked the cards that were first picked at least 50 times in my data set. So I didn't pick some, because we would have some absurd results if I picked cards that were first picked once. I think that the top win rate card would be the Absolvent Lamassu. With a 61% win rate because it was first pick once and then the person trophied. So there you go. Despite first picking the Lamassu. That's why it's important to at least limit some kind of a sample size. I picked it is 50 only, so imagine that there is large uncertainties on those graphs and the order is not strict. But I think that Judith will firmly be quite low. I don't even think that Judith itself is a particularly weak card. I think that it's not just a reason to start drafting Rakdos. It should be the sort of a card that is in the weakest color pair. So if you are in there, you might get it like pick 7. And then maybe it will be fine. But first picking it and forcing Rakdos because of seeing Judith, no. I would pick Rakdos and force Rakdos because Rakdos, the 6/6 Trampler, is good. Also, Judith is, as Thierry says in the chat, Judith is, well, at least implies in the chat, Judith is suffering a bit from the fact that Rakdos doesn't really have that great spells because the bunch of their spells are removal, who are slightly underperforming. You don't want to overload your deck on those. To play Judith, you need to cast instant and sorceries in order to get the payoffs. And for most of your spells, the gain Death Touch and Lifelink part is not so interesting. And creating the 2/2 red imp is good, but you won't trigger it too many times. So in the end, it's not that great. Like compare that to Vanifar, which costs 1 mana less, is also a 3/4, and instantly will put you a 2/2 with a ward on the battlefield. Plus it has like amazing synergies because you can cloak, I don't know, a Bubble Smuggler and flip it for 2 mana to add a 6/5 or something like that. And then it can boost your army of cloak cards. It's a different league altogether. When Judith costs 1 mana more, has the same power toughness, and then eventually, if you're lucky enough, you will get some kind of a payoff with those imps. But Thierry is also mentioning that it's okay to splash it in Is It? And I didn't think about it, but I also never picked Judith in my draft. Because the biggest problem with it, you tap out 5 mana, cast it, someone plays like Bite Down with Crime, and then it's dead, and you got 0 value from it, or you have to wait till like turn 8 to double spell, which is also not optimal. Another card that has a low win rate as the first pick is Forensic Gadgeteer. And this is a problem, I think, in the design. I think that this card was not designed for this limited format. It probably was, I don't know, was it maybe designed for the previous set? But then on the other hand, you didn't get any discount on sacrificing maps because they cost 1. But the problem here is that, yeah, you make some artifacts, you make Clue, but Forensic Gadgeteer requires you to cast an artifact, and you don't cast those artifacts that frequently. If it was an artifact heavy set where you cast a lot of artifacts, I think that with maybe slightly different wording, this card would be amazing in Lost Caverns of Ixalan, because you cast like your stupid 1/2 that gives -2/-0, and you create a Clue, which is another artifact, and it would be just completely out of whack in Lost Caverns of Ixalan. And I think in some other, like in Bro, it would have been probably sick and one of the highest win rates cards, and you would have to kill it inside or something. But in this set, you just don't have enough castable artifacts. And I played with that card once, and I even had a couple of artifacts to cast, but it was just not enough. Yeah, in some decks it might be okay. In some decks it might be okay when you're like super heavy on Clue synergies, and that 1 mana discount is giving you something. Body is fine, I guess. Like a 2/3 blocks this disguise creatures, I guess. But still, this is not something that you start with. It should be something that you get as a reward for being in the right place in the right moment. Yeah, with Coat it's good, but on the other hand, Coat with Island is also good. Coat with 3 lands is good. So that's the thing. Like, if it makes slightly better a card that's already busted, I don't think that this is warranting a first pick. Yeah, basically, Coat with the ability to cast the Coat is good. I didn't put the Coat in the first slide of the presentation today for nothing. I think the card is sweet. Next, we have the of the cards that I'm going to mention, Krenko's Bus Crusher. This has pretty low win rate, and that might be surprising because it is in one of the better colors, but still only 50% win rate for the decks that first pick Krenko's Bus Crusher. I think that, yeah, it also puts people maybe in the slightly wrong lane when you first pick it. And the card is not as good as it seems, because as a 4/4 artifact, it's a bit more fragile to removal than maybe other potential bombs. If it was just 4/4 meat creature, I think it would have been much better than it is. A Perimeter Enforcer, I think that this is also a card that people are slightly too high on, in a way that this is a white card, but it's not a white card that is good in every single white combination. I think there can be a good Boros deck with Perimeter Enforcer, but not every Boros deck will want a Perimeter Enforcer. So that's one lane that is not like a guarantee for Perimeter Enforcer. I think it's good in white blue, but do you want to pick this and go into white blue for this? I don't think so. I don't think it's good enough, and I think that the numbers sort of suggest it. And yeah, it's not so good in white black, and it can be good in white green, but also you need to have a specific version of white green for the card to be good. So I would say this is the kind of card that you want to pick later. I'm not saying super late, but maybe like pick 4 in pack 1, or maybe in pack 2 you might want to do that. But we're talking about pick 1 pack 1 here, and as a pick 1 pack 1 enforcer is not such an amazing choice. And then Torch to Witness was a card that surprised me. I don't know if it's a glitch in the data, because the card has amazing win rate in general, but as a first pick it didn't perform that well. So the decks that have it are around 51% win rate, and I don't know what to give to that particular number. It might be that it's not the kind of a card that you want to start your draft with. Although I was never unhappy with Torch the Witness ever, because I can put it in 5 color. What else do we have? We have also Tunnel Tipster, and again, this is the kind of a card that I want in my deck. I want multiple copies in my deck, but I don't necessarily want to start my draft with it, because if I start with the Tunnel Tipster, I might be put into maybe less desirable lanes of drafting too many disguised cards, and I think that this is something that people fall into a trap. Gleaming Gear Drake at 51.6%. Is it, I think, is one of those archetypes that I love. It's great, but you have to sort of slide into is it. You cannot force it in this set because it's too dependent on the uncommons. So I so much like the idea of it. I loved playing the one time that I had it open, but across, I don't know, 30, 35 drafts, I managed to get is it deck once, and other times I just didn't see any kind of late payoffs, and I was afraid to force it. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I should have been more assertive in trying to get the is it decks. But also, whenever I played is it opponents in the best of three queues, I always found their is it decks slightly lacking. So they had like some quality. They had the usually Gleaming Geardrick or maybe even two, but like the median card of their deck, or maybe like the 25th percentile card of their deck, was under par and underwhelming because of that. And I probably won most of those matchups. So I don't know. I'll stick not forcing is it and trying to wait for that one day when it's actually super open, and then I go in and get a trophy and everyone is cheering. Yeah, and as chat mentions, it is a very uncommon heavy deck. That's why probably you cannot really force it. You need to be both lucky that it's open and both lucky that the right cards are opened in your pod. And last card, Galvanize. I don't think that removal is a sort of type of a card that you want to be starting your draft in most of the time. Because my dog is scratching on the door. All right, come, baby. You have to say hi to chat now. There you go. Say hi to the chat. Say hi to the chat. No, don't lick the microphone, please. It's gross as it is. Oh. Yeah. Okay. You did your job. There, you got a free dog equity. Oh, yeah, that must be nice. 4 cases of the Filch Falcon. Dog champ, indeed. Okay. Back to the seminar. We're almost there. Last part of the seminar is all about wheeling, and I think that wheeling is a certain level up in your limited game when you can realize that you can pick 2 cards from a pack. When you open something and you see a particular card, sometimes it's better. You have a choice of 2 uncommons, let's say, and one of them is slightly better, but the other one is maybe slightly worse, but you have a good feeling that you will wheel another card that will fit with it very nicely. Then you basically pick 2 cards versus the one, and sometimes it's worth to speculate on those 2 cards and do a gamble. But I'm not a type of a gambler that gambles blindly. I like to gamble with some information in it, and knowing what is the sort of like rough percentage of a card wheeling when you open it is no, don't play gamble, please. I had an opponent play gamble. They gambled, and I think I picked the card that they gambled for, and it was sad. And by the way, gamble is in this set, so yeah, be careful. It doesn't wheel also because it's probably a mythic from the list or something. So this is the curve from last set. When I look at the ALSA of a card and the probability of it wheeling when you open it, pick one. The sad ones. This is from previous set. This is from LCI, and the sad cards that almost always wheel are basic lands, which would not surprise you, I guess. You will see them in the graph from this set, but you will see them here because they are absent, but they are still on the list for some reason. Whatever. But what you can see from here is that if a card has ALSA of around 6, you have around 45% of wheeling it. If a card has ALSA of 4, you have 15% of wheeling it. So by looking at the ALSA of a card, you can sort of estimate the probability of it wheeling. So like cards with ALSA under 2 will never wheel. Cards with ALSA of 3 will wheel like 5% of the time. But cards with ALSA of like 7 will wheel around 70% of the time. So if you have that situation And in some sets that will happen more than in the others, that you have actually decent cards with ALSA of 7. Like one of those cards in LCI was the little cogwork wrestler. So for example, if you open a pack and you have Captain Storm and a cogwork wrestler versus Alltech Cloud Guard, you may say that Alltech Cloud Guard and Captain Storm are close in power level, but because you have that cogwork wrestler, maybe you want to pick the Captain Storm, and you know that you're going to wheel a good artifact for your deck, exactly what you want, this sort of instant combat trick with Captain Storm. The 13 card packs not necessarily weaken the wheeling effect. I think that's a good comment from the chat. I will highlight it so that YouTube people can actually read it. It doesn't necessarily weaken the wheeling effect. It depends on the set design quite a lot. And I think WotC said the right things when they were announcing the play boosters, but I don't think that in this set they nailed it. And we're going to talk about it in a second. But if you will change those packs, but at the same time, you will trim all those cards, basically. If all those cards are trimmed from the new set, so you remove only those kind of super filler cards that will almost always wheel, and you keep all the other commons that are better, and you trim the tail from that side, you will not see any problem with wheeling by removing this one card, because you remove the cards that were not needed by anyone anyway. And they said that they are trying to do it, but I don't think that they did. They still put all those cards that are always wheel kind of cards. And because of that, I think that in this set particularly, wheeling is not as a potent tool as we're going to hopefully see in a second. So yeah, this is the old set. Let's move to the new set. This is the new set, and the curve looks almost identical. So repetition, ALSA is as predictive as it used to be. So still, when you have the ALSA of 6, you actually have slightly higher chance of wheeling, around 50%. You still get around 15% at ALSA of 4. You still have around 5% at ALSA 3. Very, very similar curve. It doesn't flatten at the end as it did in the previous one. So it goes like slightly more straight. And that might be the effect of multiple rares in the packs. I don't know. I didn't find exact reason why it's that, but it's super close. So I have like an old article in MTGA Zone when I have like a very neat curve that you can look at, and you can sort of use it to find the probability of wheeling when open. If you can find it, you can bookmark it, and when you're drafting, you can just like go with your finger. Okay, can I wheel this card? Yes or no? Also, good idea for someone making overlays to give you the probability of wheeling of a card as a sort of like data point when you are looking at the cards during your draft. So I selected some cards, different probabilities of wheeling to talk about and give you an impression of what data says about those cards and how can you speculate about wheeling those. And here we have what I call long shot wheel targets. These are the cards that will wheel roughly 10% of the time. We have Nervous Gardener, which is a lovely card. One of my favorite cards in this format so far. I even managed to play it on turn 2 once, shockingly. I resisted the temptation of a value, and that was actually in a very weird game when I sort of like completely abandoned the notion of value for the notion of I want to kill my opponent dead. And I played turn 2 Nervous Gardener, turn 3 some kind of disguised creature, turn 4 Greenbuilt Radical, which is another morph that I usually play as a morph to try to squeeze out most of the value. That's the one that flips into a mini overrun. And turn 5, I played Vengeful Creeper, another morph that you can flip and destroy artifact or enchantment for value. So basically, on my curve, I had 3 of the creatures that I can play as disguised for value, but I played them face up, and it works fantastically. I can tell you that 2 drop into 3 drop into a 4/4/4 drop into a 5/5/5 drop was just enough. Yeah, it's not that bad at all. I just like decided I won't have a space on my mana curve to flip it or anything. I don't have any payoffs for that. I played a 2-color deck, so I was not hungry for lands. I was super happy to cast Nervous Gardener on curve. In this format, I think 2/2 vanilla is also a decent stat line. But okay, Nervous Gardener is the kind of a card that you have 10% of chance of winning. So if you see it in the pack and you don't want to pick it because you got better things, you can keep it in the back of your head. It might return. If it returns, it's a sort of a signal for you that this is one of those pods when green is slightly more open than somewhere else. It's not going to tell you that green is wide open, but it's going to give you a decent indication of that, because you know that only happens 10% of the time, and probably in those 10% of the time you have a high overrepresentations of the drafts where green was open for that particular seed. And then we have two multicolor cards, Gleaming Drake, which is a great card with a very high win rate. That still wins 10% of the time. But keep in mind, this is one of those cards that has a very different ALSAs in pack 1 and in pack 3. So if you open it in pack 1, you see it, probably don't count on it wheeling. But if you see it in pack 3, you open it, you probably have a higher chance than 10% that it will wheel. If you identify your lane correctly, you may sort of try to guess that there is a good chance of it wheeling. And it will be probably closer to 25% than to 10% in that particular case. And Coerce to Kill is another case, exactly like Gleaming Drake. This one also has a higher ALSA in pack 3, so it will go later in pack 3. So in pack 3, you can speculate on it wheeling and keep it in mind. But probably, if it's the best thing in the pack, just pick it. Don't gamble it. But if you have something slightly better or equal, you probably have a higher chance of wheeling Curse to Kill than of wheeling monocolored card. And you can also compare the ALSA of those two cards and then sort of try to guess which one will be more likely to wheel. Then we move like gamble kind of things. Less than 50-50 to wheel, but a decent chance. And we have Extract a Confession. That one has 30% chance of wheeling. So if you're picking something green and you think you might be going for some kind of a green-black concoction, Extract a Confession, 3 out of 10 times it will come back to you, again, giving you some sort of signal. Projector Inspector, the card I speculated on wheeling several times, and so far 0% success rate, but I guess I need to do it more times, and 30% of the time it will happen for me. Unfortunately, alas, it did not so far. I don't know. I'll never find a good spot of picking it, and then I always regret not having it because the card is great, but I always have like something slightly better, and then I end up with 0 Projector Inspectors, which probably means I was in the pots where it was not to be. And the third card is Repulsive Mutation. Again, because it's a multicolor card, same applies. It will go earlier in pack 1, and it will go later in pack 3 than those 30%. So probably it will wheel 20% in pack 1, and these are guesstimates, so don't quote me on that, and maybe 40% of the time in pack 3. Pink Pants, that's a good warning for the viewers. I bet Mutation has misleading data because people like me fail to click on the spell they want to counter. 4 times I was this close to select 0 spells, and so far I stopped myself in the last second, but the user interface on the card is not intuitive. It should first target the card and then the creature, and then it will be all dandy, because you will never forget the creature, you will forget the spell. Yeah, I didn't do it by pure once. Literally, it was just pure fortune. I missed the button, and then I saw, oh wait, I need to still select the spell. Okay, here we have the coin flips. So the cards that wheel 50% of the time, and here this is actually where it becomes interesting, because these are the cards that I selected. There are probably more of them, not that many though, which is a bit sad. But these are the cards that you would be probably quite happy to put in your deck most of the time. And they wheel 50% of the time, roughly. So Vitu-Ghazi Inspector is a key card for your green-black, green-blue kind of collect evidence decks. It's really great against aggro decks because those 2 lives are a lot in this format. That's why Makeshift Binding is so good, because of the 2 life gain. And that's why Vitu-Ghazi Inspector is way better than I anticipated before the format started. But the 1/3 that can turn into a 2/4, but can maybe enhance some other creature, and you gain that 2 life, and maybe you get like the leave the graveyard trigger, and maybe you get like the collect evidence trigger from something else. All those things are quite sweet on the card. And 50% of wheeling means that you can pick something good for your deck. Half of the time you'll get this one as your 9th pick, which is something that you'll be very happy to put in your deck. So this is like a great card to speculate on wheeling. Persuasive Interrogators is not like something I would first pick, but it's a really good top end for any kind of mostly green-black deck, I would say. And if you have two of them, that becomes a real plan for the deck, because you can kill opponent quite quickly with toxic damage then, without even having to turn any creature sideways. And I just won with the card just by attritioning the opponent for some time, and then at the end of that attrition period, dropping Persuasive Interrogators and having a very big body that kills them very quickly, that also draws you a card later, and yeah, happy times. And lastly, Innocent Bystander, and this is a sort of filler kind of red aggro deck creature, but it's okay. There's nothing wrong with that at all. And yeah, you don't want to pick it early, and that's why you can speculate on wheeling it, and you'll get a good 50% of chance when you open it to wheel it. And then there's like what I call sure wheel targets. They are not guaranteed to wheel, but you got a good 70% chance. And we were talking about cards that are not so amazing. But I still played every single one. I didn't play Maskmaker yet, but there are dedicated decks to Maskmaker that are decent, and some people swear by it. I think that in LCI, 70% wheel targets were slightly better because we had Cogwork Wrestler there, which was an honestly good card. But here there is not so much in the set, and I think that this is the sort of signal that WotC promised that they will trim all those filler useless cards, but they didn't, and because of that, nothing decent wheels because the packs are smaller, and that's the reality of it. That you want to have a pack with 10 good cards in order for something decent to wheel, but you're not getting packs with 10 good cards, therefore only very, very filler cards are wheeling. But Repeat Offender is fine in many decks. I said I played it multiple times, and like aggressive Rakdos deck that can exist, or even just like a blocker for disguised creature that can maybe later become a larger threat in green black. It's fine. Jaded Analyst also can be played in detective decks. So if you like pick Private Eye and you have Jaded Analyst in the deck, you know that it will most likely come back to you, and you're okay with that. And it's also, I know that there are some people that swear by it in Izzet detective deck. When you play this hyper low to the ground Izzet deck that generates clues and slams with Jaded Analysts in it. So yeah. Glass 19403 likes having bad cards because it separates scrubs from the grinders. By the way, you know, I honestly, you say that new players are still able to take them, play them, and realize not all cards are good, and think that this is fun because I'm planning, and maybe I will do a segment on it in my next seminar. I'm planning one on what's he designing learning the game into the game, because I think that there are several cards and several things in this particular set that are almost look like they've been designed to teach you something about Magic at different levels. And I think that it's an interesting topic, and I have at least several cards and several mechanics from this particular set that I wanted to talk about, how set design can teach you certain behaviors in the game. And that's why playing multiple sets is going to make you a better player, because you just learn more things through those sets. So I don't know if there's taking for that kind of content, but I'll try to either write an article or add it as a segment in my seminar. Acknowledgements. We reached the end of the seminar. Thanks for the chat for being here. Thanks for 17 Lands team for providing all this data. This would have not ever been possible without having this data. I don't know what I would be doing, probably having a life or something. Then, of course, thanks to Fake Jake Brown, who is my guardian angel in terms of releasing it in the podcast version, and spending probably months or per episodes on removing all the 5-second pause for a T. All those things are gone because Fake Jake Brown, amazing editing skills. By the way, if you're looking for someone to help with editing, I think he has still some spaces in his calendar, so consider it. He's amazing, and also a thoroughly decent person, even if he's mad as a box of squirrels. I also would like to thank Esescu and Mana Junkie for the music I'm using in the podcast version of this, and I would like to thank Dylan and Snaptistician for becoming new patrons. I'll also maybe a small shout out to Sam, who used to be my patron, but decided to upgrade their membership, which is as good as becoming a new patron. So thanks for that. But don't worry, if you are willing to become a patron, there are still spots available. I'm not limiting it, despite I don't know, why would you limit it? No, I'm not limiting ever. And there are some perks coming up with it, so consider it. And thanks to MTGA Zone for sponsoring the pod and giving me a column where I can spill out my random thoughts about the format. And with that, I'll see you next week, where we should have the first look at the actual game data. So we're going to look at some deeper dives, looking at individual cards and what we can do with it. But till then, see you next week.